There are days when you instinctively lower your voice to make everything feel pleasant, shrinking yourself to avoid being seen as a nuisance, still forcing a smile and saying, "I'm fine," even when you're exhausted deep down. That exhaustion often doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from constantly editing yourself to fit the gaze and expectations of others. You strive to become an acceptable version of yourself, only to end up feeling like you're living inside a shell. But eventually, you will realize peace rarely takes root from universal approval. Peace begins when you grant yourself freedom. No need to prove, no need to ask permission, and no need to please. Stoic philosophers remind us of something simple. Whatever lies beyond your reach should not be given power over your mind. Praise or criticism, the fickleness of the world, silence or indifference. These are things we cannot control. Yet, we often unconsciously let ourselves be dragged along. A cold look or a delayed reply is enough to make the day feel heavy. We think we are free, but we depend on external signals for reassurance. The most stoic thing is not to act tough. It is to learn how to cut those invisible strings so that stability returns to its rightful place, within you. If you want to cultivate a mind that is calm and clear, start with a small act. Pause for a few seconds before reacting and ask yourself, what can I actually control in this situation? Feel free to leave a comment about the situation that most often forces you to say, "I'm fine." I will read them and create a deeper video on exactly what you need. And if this journey resonates with you, join Stoic Journey by subscribing or sharing this with someone tired of living by expectations. Not to please the world, but to remind yourself you deserve to live authentically. And peace can start today. Healing doesn't necessarily come from the world becoming gentler or others suddenly understanding you better. It often comes from the moment you look directly at the root of your fatigue. Not because you are weak, but because you have tried for too long to be good enough in the eyes of everyone else. When you stop giving power to things outside your control, you no longer have to live through pretense. You begin to live with steadiness, lighter, clearer, and freer. Part 1. The whispers of exhaustion and the crave for approval. Have you ever startled yourself with the realization that you are wearing yourself thin just to maintain a smile that feels just right in the eyes of others? The fatigue that clings to you every night doesn't necessarily come from doing too much. It comes from the constant need to adjust yourself, to avoid being misunderstood, criticized, or left behind. From an early age, whether intentionally or not, we were taught a fragile belief that safety comes when we are pleasant enough, compliant enough, and unobtrusive enough. So you began learning to read every frown, to hear every sigh, and then hastily reshaped yourself into whatever form the moment demanded. You call it tact, finesse, or being considerate. But deeper down, sometimes it is just a silent thirst for validation that is pulling your strings. This thirst turns your heart into a compass that always points toward others. There are times you send a message, then wait, and the silence that stretches with every passing minute feels like a hollow knocking inside your head. Instead of simply thinking they are busy, you immediately turn inward, rereading every word, asking yourself what you said wrong, if you've become less attractive, or if you are not enough. Your peace can crumble over a delayed response, a curt reply, or a look that isn't as warm as usual. This isn't necessarily being sensitive. It's a sign that you are placing the remote control of your emotions in someone else's hands. When you live this way for too long, your day is dictated by the smallest things. A compliment makes you feel weightless, while a cold attitude leaves you heavy, as if your life is a table that anyone can touch and tilt. The first step to breaking this loop doesn't require a forced toughness, but a gentle clarity. Next time you encounter indifference or a remark that stings, don't rush to take it home and judge yourself with it. Create a quiet space, just for a few seconds, to watch that feeling pass through your chest like a wave. Then remind yourself of a plain truth. How others behave is often a reflection of their inner world, not a verdict on your worth. When you stop picking up scraps of external validation, you begin to reclaim your power, quietly but decisively. And to uproot that dependency, we must look directly at an even subtler illusion, the one that makes you think you are in control, while in reality, it is quietly binding you tighter. Part 2. The illusion of control and the self-valuation. The harsh truth behind the wounds you carry lies not entirely in what others have done, but in the meaning you unconsciously assign to it. We often pride ourselves on steering our lives, but sometimes control is merely a sophisticated illusion, trying to grip things that were never meant for our hands. You stake your self-worth on fragile signals like attitudes, praise, or attention. Then, any small tremor can send you falling. A single message not answered on time, a delay of a few hours, is enough for the mind to convene its own court of law. You begin dissecting every syllable, wondering where you went wrong, sentencing yourself with the worst-case scenarios. A blank stare or an accidental frown suddenly becomes a distorted mirror for you to gaze into and doubt yourself. In those moments, you are silently granting someone else a massive power. The power to price your peace of mind. The irony is that those yardsticks were flawed from the start. Someone's coldness or harsh reaction is rarely a conclusion about who you are. It is usually a leakage of their own internal state, unnamed fatigue, unprocessed trauma, or fears they hide behind a mask. Yet you exhaust yourself waiting for validation from people who are still struggling with their own inner turmoil. You gamble your peace in hopes of an apology, waiting for a clear ending, waiting for justice to arrive and close the story. But waiting for justice from someone who has already turned their back is sometimes just a way to tighten your own shackles. The sharpest lesson in regaining mastery is understanding that freedom doesn't necessarily come when they admit they were wrong. It comes when you grant yourself the right to move on. You don't need them to acknowledge your pain for that pain to be real. You don't need them to understand you for you to be worthy of healing. And this is where self-valuation begins. When you stop craving to be understood, when you withdraw the privilege of valuation from others' hands, you suddenly feel strangely light. Their silence is no longer a sentencing. It becomes a space for you to hear your own voice again, to rebuild your standards, boundaries, and dignity in a way that no one can bargain with. You begin to see everything more clearly. What you need is not an answer from them, but a promise from yourself that from today, your value will not be hung upon a text message, a fleeting emotion, or the nod of a stranger. But there will be times when the real storm hits, not just silence, but provocation and disrespect, forcing you to react so they can feel they've won. In those moments, how do you stand in the middle of chaos without getting scratched? There is a kind of strength that doesn't need to scream to prove itself, that doesn't need a sharp edge to counterattack. It is more primal, more silent, and far more formidable. Part 3. The power of silence and the courage to walk away. That primal and formidable weapon is actually far from loud. It is silence. We grow up with a common belief that we must speak up, win the argument, and defend ourselves with words to be considered strong, while silence is seen as weakness or resignation. But the stillness born from insight is entirely different. It is not fear. It is a choice. There are moments when you stand amidst an absurd accusation in a meeting or a cold, sarcastic remark from someone once close to you. Your instinct will urge you to react immediately, to explain, to justify, to strike back, to demand justice. But the very moment you manage to pause, swallow the urge to plead, and look them straight in the eyes with a steady composure, you have flipped the board. You refuse to enter the emotional game they've laid out. You refuse to provide the mirror for them to project their insecurities onto you. That silence is not empty. It thickens into a kind of presence that forces the other person to face themselves, and that is what makes them most uncomfortable. When you master the non-reaction moment, you reach a deeper level, the courage to walk away. Society often glorifies endurance until exhaustion, turning sacrifice into a medal and calling clinging responsibility. Thus, many carry an illusion that leaving a place where you once belonged is cowardice, betrayal, or being not good enough to try harder. But there are tables where respect ran out long ago. Sitting there only erodes your dignity. And walking away doesn't have to be a drama. No tears, no slamming doors, no proclamations needed for others to understand. Sometimes it is just a silent step back, slow but decisive, withdrawing yourself from loops that drain your vitality. When someone repeatedly tests your boundaries, you don't need to spend a lifetime teaching them how to behave. You only need to reclaim your presence and use that withdrawal to teach yourself a more important lesson. Stop lowering your standards just to stay. However, silence and walking away only truly heal when they don't turn into a simmering pressure inside. If you turn your back while carrying resentment, if you keep quiet while your heart still boils, then external stillness becomes a lid, not freedom. Therefore, to be able to walk out with genuine lightness, you need to touch a subtler region of the mind. There is always a tiny gap before the emotional storm erupts. A space that lasts only a few seconds, but whoever captures it, captures their entire day. And that is where we will step into in Part 4. How to master the moment before the reaction, so that you aren't just silent for show, but silent for freedom. Part 4. From reaction to response, the art of mastering the space. To maintain a silence sharp and steady enough to walk away from toxic loops without being pulled back, you must master an invisible gap, the space between reaction and response. The world is always tossing small sparks at you, enough to start a fire. A colleague drops a sarcastic comment in a meeting, a loved one suddenly snaps at you for no reason, or a cold message arrives right when you are feeling low, and immediately heat rises in your chest, urging you to give as good as you get to save face. Survival instinct drags you into battle to protect the ego. But if you counterattack immediately, you don't win. You are simply stepping into a familiar trap, turning yourself into a reflex machine, handing over the remote control of your nervous system to the person who just provoked you. Reaction is what snaps out by inertia, pulled by fear, by old wounds, by the habit of wanting to regain the upper hand instantly. Response is different. Response is an intentional choice, born from clarity. You don't grow by speaking louder or sharper, but by processing more intelligently. The highest power of a human being lies not in their ability to silence others with words, but in their ability to create a pause right at the edge of the abyss of chaos. Just one beat, but enough to change the entire direction. The next time resentment wells up, threatening to swallow you, try something very simple. Don't utter the first word. Take a step back, not with your feet, but with your mind. You don't need to crush your anger to appear calm. Let it swirl, but position yourself as the observer of the storm rather than diving into its eye. That brief pause is the key to breaking all manipulation, because in that moment, you will see a clear truth. Their rudeness belongs to their world,
and it has no right to cross the boundary to dictate your behavior.
You still feel the discomfort fully. You still feel the sting, the anger, but you strip away its right to drive. You don't deny the emotion. You simply refuse to let the emotion decide who you will become in the next few minutes. When you stop reflecting the world like a shadow, those used to draining your emotions will begin to lose their way. They no longer find the mirror to bounce back their own negativity, and you disarm them with your unshakable stillness. But to maintain this state sustainably, you cannot rely solely on a single breath or a few times of trying harder. You need to look back at the asset being squeezed out every day that you often ignore, an invisible currency that determines the prosperity or decline of your inner kingdom. Part 5. Energy as currency. Becoming the king who protects the crown of peace. That invisible currency is your energy and your attention. Many go through life with a fatal misconception that their vitality is a bottomless well. So, you generously pour it for anyone who knocks, regardless of whether they come to share or to drain. Look back at those midnight calls where you were turned into an emotional landfill for repetitive complaints, or the times you swallowed your resentment just to avoid damaging a relationship. By the end of the day, you aren't exhausted from hard labor. You are exhausted from spending your life force on chaos that doesn't belong to you. At this point, what you mistake for kindness is actually a form of self-deprivation. In the inner kingdom, peace is the most expensive crown, the symbol of self-mastery. A true king does not remove his crown to trade it for a few nods of approval. But every time you say yes while your body is silently screaming no, every time you push back your boundaries to soothe someone else's ego, you are handing them your crown. And when peace is taken away, everything inside you immediately loses its color. The mind becomes cluttered, the body weary, and the heart dry. You don't need more motivation. You need the right to keep your own energy. The key lesson is to change your position in your own life. Manage your energy like an investor manages capital. You wouldn't throw money into a decaying venture, so why constantly pour attention into relationships that only know how to deplete you? It is time to practice reserved privilege. Your presence, your compassion, and your time are privileges, not free services. One of the most powerful skills is saying no with a flat, calm voice. No long explanations, no excessive apologies, no justifications. Not because you are heartless, but because you understand. Constant justification is an unconscious way of asking others for permission to be respected. As you tighten your boundaries to protect the crown, some will react. They may call you cold, distant, or even selfish. You don't need to fight those labels. Most of the time, their discomfort doesn't stem from you becoming worse, but from the fact that they just lost access to your energy. The moment you stop bleeding to save the outside world, you begin to build a fortress of stillness, unassuming, yet incredibly difficult to breach. Part 6. True detachment. Loving without attachment. As you set up boundaries firm enough to protect your crown of peace, a subtle question arises. How can you still feel, still love deeply, without being drained by the world's fluctuations? The answer lies in one of the most misunderstood concepts: true detachment. Many hear detachment and think of being cold, uncaring, or building stone walls to push everyone away. But detachment is not the elimination of emotion. It is a form of wisdom. You still have a heart. You still know pain and love. It's just that you no longer let the pain drag you along like a wave pulling a boat without a rudder. Detachment is the ability to stand in the middle of a storm, feel the full force of the cold wind, but refuse to let it sweep you away. You still care. You still love.
You still want the best for others, but you don't drown in their story. You don't turn their mood into your internal weather.
This becomes especially clear when you look back at the times you exhausted yourself trying to save a fading relationship. You saw the signs, the indifference, the moments you were undervalued, yet you lulled yourself with hope. You thought it was love. But often it was attachment disguised as love, fueled by the fear of loss, of guilt, or of facing the void of solitude. An attached mind turns silence into a verdict. You send a text, they don't reply,
And internally, you immediately run 100 scripts. What did I do wrong? Am I boring them? Am I worth abandoning? But an emotionally mature mind silently views that silence as data. No coloring, no self-sentencing. You don't take their behavior as a valuation of who you are. You still feel the sting because you are human, but you don't let that sting turn into an act of desperation. The sharpest practice of detachment is to stop tethering your internal fate to the attitudes of others. You give love and kindness because that is your nature, not as a transaction to buy certainty. When you love someone, love them the way you watch a sunset, fully, passionately, but without trying to stuff the sky into your pocket to own it. You cherish its presence, and you are brave enough to accept the law of nature. The sunset will fade, the sky will change color, and you will still have yourself.
Part 7. Peace is a self-created boundary. As you gradually shed the strings of attachment, what remains in that quiet space isn't necessarily loneliness. Often, it is a sense of expansion, as if you've just stepped into a brighter room where no one is pulling you with invisible hooks. We often lull ourselves with the illusion that peace is a tranquil state that appears only when the world stops storming, when those around us finally understand us, are fair to us, and are kind to us. But the truth, both brutal and liberating, is this: peace is rarely a gift from the outside. Peace is a boundary you erect yourself, and it only exists when you are firm enough to defend it. There will always be people who interpret your stillness as arrogance, or your distance as resentment. There will always be family dinners or gatherings where someone casually tosses an intrusive question about your life choices, work, or relationships, as if your life is a rubric for them to grade. Previously, a wave of anxiety might have rushed through you. You'd scramble to explain, hurry to appease, even bend the truth just to earn a nod. But now, you simply maintain a steady gaze, a slight smile, and let the silence stay exactly where it belongs. Not to punish anyone, but to affirm something very clear. You are no longer on duty to clean up other people's emotional messes. In that moment, the steel boundary is drawn, not loud, not showy, but strong enough to change the game. The deepest lesson at this level is learning to give up the savior illusion. There are people who don't truly want to understand you. They only want to pull you back into your old role, the one who always explains, always yields, always strains to keep the peace. You don't need to fight for peace. You only need to stop handing over your peace to troubles that aren't yours. When you withdraw the privilege of self-valuation from the hands of the world, when you stop waiting for validation from eyes already clouded by their own trauma, you begin to become the anchor of your own life. The storm outside may still howl, gossip may still fly by, but they no longer have the status to touch your inner core, because you are no longer opening the door. The moment you realize you don't need anyone's understanding to be whole, you reclaim a very quiet sovereignty, the right not to be puppeted. You stand there, calm, clear, and unshakable. But the journey of a Stoic mind doesn't stop at building a fortress. When no one controls your emotions anymore, another question appears, harder, deeper, and sometimes scarier than any external attack. What will you do with your freedom? When there is no one left to blame,
No one left to cling to, no noise to be preoccupied with. How will you architect the rest of your life? This is where the final obstacle reveals itself, not the darkness of the world, but the space within you. That secret will be unlocked in the next journey. There will come a cold turning point in life where you realize, with both bitterness and pride, that inner peace is the rarest thing worth guarding until the very end. From that moment on, no indifferent glance, no judgment, and no fickle attitude will ever hold the status to pull you off your axis again. This invincible state is not about building soulless walls to hide from life. It is the pinnacle of discernment. You see others more clearly, you see yourself more clearly, and you finally know exactly who deserves the privilege of touching your energy, and who is merely a chaos you are no longer obligated to carry. You stop scavenging for understanding. You stop bowing down to explain yourself to those who have already chosen not to see your truth. You no longer live as a reflex machine, obediently puppeted by external fluctuations. Instead, you reclaim full authority to steer your own reality. The crown of stillness has been placed upon your head, and the strangest part is, you no longer need the applause or the gaze of approval, for you have granted yourself the ultimate privilege to exist with composure, clarity, and freedom. But the journey to becoming the sole ruler of your inner kingdom is never a path meant for the masses. It requires you to accept another truth. Freedom has a price, and sometimes that price is no longer being easy to understand, no longer being liked by everyone, and no longer staying in the old role that others are used to seeing. If these sharp truths have stung you today, if they felt like a needle piercing the safety shell you've worn for too long, your presence here is no accident. It is the call of a mind exhausted by submission, beginning to crave a sovereign life. If you wish, leave a comment and share the moment you decided to draw your boundary. Whether it was a single no, a timely silence, or the courage to walk away. And if you are ready to continue this path with Stoic Journey, hit subscribe and spread this video as a silent but firm commitment to yourself. Choose to be awake and refuse to live as a victim of your emotions. Right now, click on the video appearing on your screen to step deeper into that quiet space where we will decode the final obstacles and build an unshakable inner strength. Thank you for walking with Stoic Journey, where your peace is always the ultimate sovereignty.